Sup, you guys like mythology, right? I don't have to threaten most people on this one, unlike history. Thankfully, because from pop culture and novels you'll read from childhood and schooling all the way through college, you'll become ingrained in the fantasy that created our modern culture. Mythology has become interwoven in our society. Companies like Disney and Ghibli have given breath into old stories and fantastic legends which have become otherwise forgotten if the world hadn't been so open to these amazing tales. We have superheroes derived from stories like Hercules and Beowulf, entire tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, which specialize in making this mythology more tangible for our imagination, and video games in countless volumes which circulate and innovate the same ideals in never-before-seen heights. History consists of two parts, after all, the proven and the fantastical. As human civilization has evolved, so has its mythologies, and I think that's mostly true throughout any culture we look at, though I really hate to make sweeping generalizations on any topic in particular. So what mythological creature am I going to start out covering? Well, it was a simple choice for me over any other. It's goblins, okay? I just love the little green guys so much. They're one of my favorite Dungeons & Dragons creatures, one of my favorite villain tropes due to how poorly they're understood and incredibly underrated in the scale of capabilities throughout mythologies and modern tabletops. Now, I don't want to talk about shows like Goblin Slayer, not because I dislike it. I actually really enjoyed some of the clever uses of stuff in their magical world, but mainly because it's already been beaten half to death on the goblin trope and also solidifies a lot of misgivings on authors in the treatment of those magical creatures. And to be quite frank, I want to show you guys the actual mythologies of these little buggers and prove that, like the bard class on a tabletop game, it's been subjected to the machinations of a disturbed individual with zero comprehension of the physical lore that they come from. And that's okay. Ignorance, after all, is part of the process of how we learn. To begin with, goblins in the western part of Europe differ greatly from those in the east, and that's generally acceptable seeing that they would be traversing their differing opinions on a likened mythology to each other, and we just blend it all up like modern soup. For instance, in western culture, they're more of a mischievous little thing, attaching themselves to homesteads or grottos and pulling hilarious little pranks on people, like taking their night clothes off so they get cold at night, or banging pots and pans in the middle of the night. However, that's not all they're particularly known for. It was common in these regions for goblins to signify a form of disciplinary presence in a child's life, acting as a gift giver when that child behaved and disciplining them when they were mischievous. In Eastern Europe and a lot of Russia, goblins became perpetuated with the idea of speldings, or as we know them today, companions. You know, pets in video games that we enjoy to collect so much. Yeah, that's what they essentially were in Eastern culture, associated with witches and wizards, and that honestly sounded pretty cool. They were generally unpleasant and would go around collecting ingredients for their masters and acting like a little mythological security system, but due to their association with magic and being mean-spirited, they were often seen as a grotesque creature to avoid by the common folks. Besides these nicer variants, we do have some fairly evil and otherwise avoidable circumstances with goblins across what we know as the United Kingdom's landscape. It becomes a form of blanket term for malicious spirits or fae, similarly to how medieval Europe would use the word demon for absolutely anything that they didn't agree with. Some of these included the red cap, because they like to paint their hats red with you, hobgoblins, aka man-sized ones who acted primarily as tricksters, the pretty radical not-a-goblin Erkling who often enough gets bunched into the group, and the Spanish and Portuguese had a similar ordeal with gnomes being called the Trasgu. In the Americas, there are two types of goblins, the I promise you this isn't racist brownie, and the much more fun to say puckwudgie. These guys don't really count though, because they're less of a goblin and more of another class of mythological creature who's small but has more of a terrifying ability set, such as teleporting and manifesting mountains. Now, the one that everyone associates with the cave-dwelling stinky-foot villains of Dungeons & Dragons is undoubtedly the Moki, which originate from the cultures surrounding the Andes. Beyond this, Asiatic countries have some of the most interesting forms of goblins, interpreting them in ways that in themselves would require an entire video, but here's some of the cool ones for the sake of time. In South Korea, the Dokubai are much like Western European ones, acting as important disciplinary individuals who reward the good and punish the evil. In Islamic culture, they are classified as a form of jinn, and in Japan, they have this awesome goblin rat that I would like to have as a pet personally. It is without a doubt the Mookie who have influenced goblin perspectives the most in modern culture, however, as their description matches the cave-dwelling miner to a T. AD, though even their barbarity only went as far as devouring those who would venture into their mountains, lacking the dramatic flair that many interpretations have given us over the years. I blame primarily two sources on this: the root causes of goblins in our culture getting such a negative rap, that being their use in tabletops like Dungeons & Dragons, as well as that of modern literature like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, countless anime and video games, and certain anti-Semitic World War II influences. Dungeons & Dragons being by far the largest culprit in the scheme to make goblins into something they're not. It's one of the first instances I could find of goblins requiring reproduction on a violent scale, or even being driven by such things. I think it boils back down to the sadistic urge for a writer to self-insert conflated fantasies into an individual dungeon master's own fiction that they created. And I'm not saying that this is what the writers of Dungeons & Dragons intended to happen, but by allowing the notion to exist, they left the door open for this modern interpretation, which in my opinion is widely a misunderstood one. After all, what is it that Dungeons & Dragons actually says about goblins in general? According to pages 165 and 166 of the Monster Manual for 5th edition, goblins are selfish creatures with evil hearts and love nothing more than to abuse the authority when they receive it. They are lazy and undisciplined, unlike their larger cousins the hobgoblin and the bugbear, and are generally small green creatures with mean intentions and great abilities in constructing large winding labyrinths, tame giant rats and direwolves, capable of forming great inner working societies under leader and follower dynamics. Finally, they worship a god not out of admiration but in fear, knowing when they die they will enter his service and fear his tyranny. They are crafty and stealthy creatures, preferring numbers to individual combat, existing in large colonies which can differ from hordes to city-like. Quick creatures who can use their minds and reflexes to stay alive and try to learn as much as they can from the next generation. We can gather here, there is nothing up here about reproductive needs, nothing about wishing to enslave others or to commit such foul evils that they border the line of sadism. They are tyrannical and evil, but no more or no less than the humans they interact with and try to kill. They are no more or no less what we make them out as is all mythology. So in all this time, I failed to say exactly what a goblin is in its entirety, and that's on purpose, because I wanted to present the ideologies of these creatures in the perspective of where they existed and where we drew our influences from, before I make those distinctions. To mythology, a goblin might be considered more than a little green man living in a cave, killing adventurers and hoarding shinies. He's a beacon of the mysterious world interacting with our own. The little prankster who's willing to take our jacket and leave it somewhere strange, all because you didn't take out the trash on time. In modern cinematics and games, the goblin became a device of sadism for authors. I say this with the full knowledge that you have to express your negative intentions for a story into something. But where do we draw the line as authors? To that end, where do we choose to leave the medium of a mythology we ourselves did not create? And because of this, do we get the right to adapt it into such a bastardization that it will be unrecognizable from its original form? The Islamic cultures and the Irish had it best. A goblin is whatever we choose it to be. It can be an evil djinn or it can be a good one. It can be trusted with your children or it can be left to gnaw on their corpses. The choice really is up to whoever holds the pen at the time. How should you go about creating goblins? Well, up to you, my man. I gave you the description of what the game says, and you could look up any variety of these guys for yourself that existed in mythology, but I have a couple points I could recommend. First, goblins are social creatures, so create a hierarchy with a bunch of bureaucracy that operates on a large scale. You could even make it stupid. You kill Brian, Dave can't get a haircut, now cause Brian was the barber. Secondly, make them interesting. They don't just hiss and stab you with poisonous knives. Think the Goblin King in The Hobbit. He's probably got a whole song and dance for every adventurer before picking and stripping their gear and throwing them down to the giant rats. Lastly, make them stealthy. They are more willing to hide or run away from direct confrontation, but that doesn't stop guerrilla warfare with booby traps and misdirection like they showcase in Goblin Slayer. You can do a lot with them other than, make them reproductively obsessed. Hi there, before I go, I wanted to let you know that I appreciate the time you've spent listening to this and all my other videos, and I'm glad I can inform you about these topics I enjoy. We all have power to make the choice to make our work into something we enjoy and are proud of. And while it's hilarious to create some fun tropes and idiocracies for mythologies, please let's remember these come from somewhere, cultures that lived and died worshipping them and believing them every bit as real as we do with modern science and religion. It is our duty as the generations who come beyond them to respectfully create and continue their memory for what it truly was, and to always stay clear of the easy bastardizations that can occur. It's our conscious choice, not only as creators, but as consumers, to speak out about these blatant problems, because if a creator is unwilling to have a dialogue about a negative annotation in their work, they should be held accountable for it. Thank you.